We're now live on YouTube.
Thank you very much, Tilly. Okay. Right, so good evening, members, and thank you very much for your attendance at tonight's budget meeting. Last year was over and last year's budget discussion took a mere 2 hours in comparison to the previous year's 6 hours. I think for the benefit of all our sanity, heading towards last year's rather than previous years would be a good thing, particularly as 6 hours on Zoom isn't particularly an attractive prospect. So I will start the meeting in just a moment, but if we can first head to Canon Hilary for introductory prayers. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good evening, everyone. Today we rejoice and give thanks for the Prime Minister's statement this afternoon concerning the government's roadmap for lifting some of the restrictions following this third lockdown. We pray tonight for this chamber, for its elected members and officers, for those who've been managing the pandemic here locally these past 12 months, for those in the NHS, the clinical commissioning group, public health and our care homes, for those industries that have literally fed us and supported us, for education providers looking after key workers' children and those with special needs, and especially for those in the voluntary third sector and the faith communities who've all gone the extra mile. Almighty and eternal God, to whom we must all give account, guide with your spirit the elected members and officers of this borough council, that they may be faithful in seeking all their purposes to enrich our common life. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Now we turn to tonight's agenda. I can't imagine a harder time for a local authority to try and set a budget. In doing so, we remember all those across Corderdale who've been suffering from financial hardship. Those who've been furloughed, now worrying about potential unemployment. For all those on benefits, we pray too for those who can make money and secure jobs, those who are able to support the local economy to help it recover and grow. Merciful God, you have compassion on all that you've made, and your whole creation is enfolded in your love. Help us to stand firm for your truth, to struggle against poverty, and to share your love with our neighbour, that as a local authority, we may be instruments of your peace. This we pray through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. And now thinking about growing the economy as we look forward in hope. Almighty God and Father, you have so ordered our life that we are dependent on one another. Prosper those engaged in commerce and industry, and direct their minds and hands that they may rightly use your gifts in the service of others. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. And now finally, a blessing for the people of Corderdale, for Calderdale Council, for its elected members and officers, for all those whom as a borough we love and those who love us, for all who may be suffering in body, mind or spirit, especially those who've died recently and all whom we mourn, continuing to remember your servant Marilyn Greenwood. God bless this town of Halifax, its homes and its people, its commerce and industry, its places of healing and learning. God bless this county and borough, its towns and villages, its parishes and churches and all places of worship. May he visit you with his mercy, surround you with his love, and fill your hearts with courage, strength and peace, now and in all our days to come. Amen. Back to you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much for that, Hilary. It's much appreciated. Okay, so now we start the meeting proper. We'll do the announcements first and members' interests, and then before we start, anything on which people might wish to speak and so on, Ian will go through the protocols for that, just to make sure everybody is clear on what is and is not permitted this evening, because it's slightly different to a normal council meeting. Okay, so item 1 on the agenda, to receive the Mayor's or Chief Executive's announcements. I have none. Robin, do you have any?
I have none, Madam Mayor, no.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further announcements from anyone? I'm not hearing anybody indicate or say anything, so we will move on to item 2. So members' interests. This also is slightly different to a standard council meeting. I remind members of the need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests or other interests they might have in relation to the items included on the council summons. Members can either declare their interest if known at this time, or at the time the item is being considered and the interest becomes apparent. In relation to disclosable pecuniary interests relating to land held by members on which they pay council tax, there is already provision in the Code of Conduct for members, which provides all members of the council with a dispensation to take part in the consideration of the budget proposals and setting of council tax. In addition, the Standards Committee on the 9th of January 2017 granted a dispensation to all members of the council who received sponsorship from the restriction in section 33 (4) of the Localism Act 2011 to enable them to take part in any decision during the budget council meeting. There is therefore no further need for members to declare either of the above disclosable pecuniary interest or dispensations they have received. These will be recorded in the minutes of the budget council meeting. Before we move on to item 3, Mr. Hughes, I would be grateful if you could explain the protocols for speaking and voting this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Members might be aware that there is an anomaly with Budget Council in that there is no time limit on speeches from members. That doesn't, however, mean that there is an unlimited ability for members to speak, because it is limited to one speech only. That's during each motion or each debate. So it's one speech, but unlimited time for that speech. There will be recorded votes for items 7 and 8. And the proposal for that is, at the appropriate time, I will ask all members to unmute themselves and to put on their videos. And I'll run through a list of members as normal, with members indicating a yes or no for the item that is to be voted upon. There will also be a small gap between items 7 and 8, subject to the way in which item 7 proceeds, in order that the email setting out the detail for the council tax calculated on the basis of item 7 having been dealt with before that email is ready to send. So we would hope to keep that as short as possible, but there will be a slight gap at that point. Madam Mayor, can I just ask, and apologies for perhaps not knowing this, but we have someone who is coming up on screen with no video as Vanessa Wilson. and none of us is sure who that is.
Sorry, Vanessa.
Vanessa Wilson.
It's not a name that's familiar to me.
Could Vanessa Wilson please indicate?
If I may, Madam Mayor.
Please do, Nigel.
Yes, Vanessa Wilson works for myself in the finance service, so she will be here if we need to do any calculations on the budget this evening.
My apologies for not knowing that, Nigel. Thank you.
That's lovely. Thank you very much for clarifying, Nigel. Much
Sorry, Vanessa.
appreciated. And apologies to Vanessa. It's very difficult to keep track of all the changes of personnel at times. So thank you for that clarification. Okay, is that everything that you need to say at this time?
It is, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Lovely. Okay, so we'll move on then to item 3. Which is the 2021-22 precepts for the Police and Crime Commissioner for the West Yorkshire and West Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Authority. And this is down as the Chief Executive will inform. So over to you, please, Robin.
I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, can you just repeat that? I couldn't hear that clearly.
Apologies. It's item 3, the Police and Crime Commissioner and West Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Authority precepts. And it says the Chief Exec will inform the Council of the precepts.
Yes, I think normally I just note the fact the precepts have been set. They're in the papers and I don't read them out, but just for information for all councillors. They're in the attached documentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And again, for item 4, which is the 2021-22 levy for the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. Robin?
Yes, just to confirm that the levy has been set and is in the attached documentation supplied to all councillors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Item 5, again, it's the 2021-22 levy for the Environment Agency.
Yes, just to say that the Environment Agency levy has been set and it's in the attached documentation for all councillors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Carter, you're wanting to ask a question under item 3. Apologies, I didn't see that at the time. Please go ahead.
Sorry, Madam Mayor, it's something quite simple, really. We're accepting a precept that's been set by the Police and Crime Commissioner for West Yorkshire. And of course, from middle of May, it will be done through the elected mayor and be devolved. Should that have a rider on it, that it automatically goes there for that amount of money? Whatever it is. Sorry.
So,
Madam Mayor, question, Councillor Carter. please do answer.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I can probably just advise that makes no difference to the setting of the precept. It will clearly be managed within the remits of the mayor from May, but it is set this year in the usual way and will be formally in the next year incorporated within the mayoral responsibilities in the precept then. But for this year, it will remain as it usually is, set out for the next 12 months at this budget council.
That's lovely. Thank you very much for the clarification and thank you for your question, Councillor Carter. So item 6 is the parish precepts of 2021-22.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Just setting them out in the usual way with the papers for each parish council as informed to all members. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now we get on to the area of discussion, and so item 7 is the general fund revenue budget for 2021-22 to 23-24. It's a recommendation of the Cabinet. I'll remind you there are no time limits on speeches for the budget debate, but you can only speak once. And okay, so if I can please invite Councillor Tim Swift to move the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. This has been a year unlike any other, as the challenge of the COVID-19 pandemic's affected us all so deeply. That challenge has been met by an astonishing response by people, communities and businesses of our district. If anyone ever doubted the values we've highlighted in Vision 2024, they've been demonstrated time and again over the last year, particularly the kindness and resilience that's been at the heart of the community response. So first and foremost, before moving on to the details of the budget, I'm sure I speak for everyone in offering our heartfelt sympathies to all the families in the district who have so painfully lost loved ones to the virus. Each loss is a tragedy. And of course, we know also that many others will be facing long-term health challenges in the months and years ahead. I want also to pay a tribute to everyone in Calderdale who's put in such an incredible response to this emergency. It really is hard to take in the scale of the effort, the work of neighbours, of volunteers and council staff, the voluntary and community sector, nurses, doctors, other public servants. It's truly humbling, and a big thank you particularly to all the public service heroes who've worked night and day to keep us safe. And as this is Budget Council, I also want to take this opportunity particularly to thank Nigel Broadbent and his finance team for their work. First of all on the budget, where they faced particularly difficulties with no real clarity on the details until the local government finance settlement in December. But secondly, for their wider work in managing the council finances during this extraordinary year, and particularly recognising that they have combined this with contributing significantly to paying out over £77 million in grants to local businesses. Madam Mayor, the council faces huge financial challenges which could not and have not been ignored by a responsible administration. These have been set out in the regular reports to Cabinet from the Head of Finance. They include, firstly, the substantial direct additional costs of keeping our communities safe and supporting them through the pandemic. But on top of that, we've seen significant reductions in the income that supports many services. Reductions in council tax and business rates income that will impact not just this year, but into the future. And additional costs for those services that have been able to remain open or reopen due to social distancing and public health measures. And all of these issues will continue to impact our budget, certainly into next year and possibly beyond. And these new and severe financial challenges have come at a time when local government was already stretched beyond anything sustainable by the impact of 10 years of austerity. Continued year-on-year cuts in central government funding for local services, while at the same time the demand, particularly for social care and many other services, has continued to increase. That's why we are faced not with the choice between council tax increases or cuts, but with the need for both. It is the direct and deliberate result of continuing Conservative government policy. The hard choices in this budget are the result of decisions taken in Downing Street. Our first priority in this budget has been to make sure that we're in a strong position to continue to do everything possible to support individuals, businesses and communities through the pandemic. It's clear we're going to see these impacts continue for many more months, and that particularly we will need to continue to work closely to support our health partners, to manage infections, and to support the long-term impact of the pandemic on health needs. That is one reason for the substantial continuing investment in adult health and well-being, which I'll return to later. The second priority is to ensure we have a robust and balanced budget. We've acted quickly and decisively throughout this year to tackle the financial pressures facing the council. This was vital, but has involved some difficult and painful actions. But if we had not done this, and if in particular, if we'd not acted through the Future Council programme to reduce long-term costs, the financial problems next year would be larger, and the savings we'd be forced to consider tonight would be even greater. We don't know what the financial climate will be beyond 2022. Once again, the government has given us a one-year settlement. Once again, they've also delayed the promised review of business rates. But whatever is announced, the likelihood is we'll face further demands for cuts and pressures. The way in which local services are funded in this country is fundamentally broken. And until government recognises that and addresses the challenges, particularly, but not only around social care, we'll face a world where we have to fight for every penny, for every service that local people value. But whilst the budget does not set out detailed proposals beyond 2022, it does provide a strong basis for planning ahead. We'll continue to look for new ways that long-term cost pressures can be reduced. And in setting this budget, we've listened carefully to the Finance Officer's advice and taken the conscious decision that remaining balances and reserves should be protected to help provide a buffer against future uncertainty. Moving on to our priorities, these are clearly demonstrated in this context, both through new investment and through particular areas of previous investment that we've been careful to protect. As I said earlier, the most significant investment in this budget is in social care. This is a response both to the continuing demand and to the likely future impacts of COVID-19 on the numbers of people who will need help and support to enable them to lead the fullest lives possible. Let me just emphasise the scale of this investment. The budget we agreed last February for adult services showed a gross spend in the current year of just under £93 million and a net budget of just under £55 million. Over the next 3 years, we are planning for this to increase year on year to reach a gross budget of £108 million and a net budget of £66 million in 23-24, a £15 million increase in the gross budget over 3 years. This reflects the rising demand, which I'd remind you is not just about older people's services, but perhaps particularly also about people with learning difficulties and other of working ages, which now accounts for around half of the adult services budget. As colleagues will know, a large proportion of social care is provided by staff who are paid at either at or a little above the national living wage. In his November spending announcement, the Chancellor decided to limit the increase in that pay rate to just 2.2%, less than the amount recommended by the Low Pay Commission. We're talking here about some low-paid workers who have spent months in the front line of the fight against the pandemic, literally putting their health and sometimes lives at risk. So part of the increase we've built into our budget will be to make sure that our care providers raise social care workers' pay at least in line with the Low Pay Commission recommendations. This is one element of our wider priority to support the most vulnerable, alongside our commitment to maintain the current scale of council tax relief, even as the demand on it is rising, but also to work through available resources and with our partners to support the vulnerable, for example, by mobilising to tackle holiday hunger. This pandemic has also shown the importance of our investment in resilience. Our experience of repeated flooding has led us to invest over the past few years, not just in flood engineering and highways flood management, but also into community wardens, an extensive CCTV system, and comprehensive out-of-hours support for critical incidents. These investments have been a vital building block in our ability to respond to the pandemic, and are all areas that are protected in this year's budget. And finally, despite the immediate challenges, it's important that we remain ambitious for the future, so we're well placed to support a sustainable recovery for our towns and our communities. That's why it's right that we continue to pursue every opportunity to support investment from all available external sources. Our focus on market towns over the last 3 years is bearing fruit, with 5 of our towns qualifying for support through various strands of the government support programmes for towns. In Halifax, we've already seen the impact of the opening of Trinity Sixth Form at Northgate, bringing hundreds of young people into the town centre. The ambitious plans for reshaping Halifax rail and bus stations, for improving transport routes around Brighouse, and for a new rail station at Elland will all contribute to the long-term strength of our communities. And as local services are increasingly dependent on council tax and business rates, we cannot afford to miss out on major investment opportunities. We are, though, doing even more to ensure that the costs of these schemes are fully recovered to avoid any unplanned impact on our revenue budget, and this is reflected in our budget proposals. Madam Mayor, this is a budget brought forward in unprecedented times. It's a budget designed to provide the stability we need to navigate the perfect storm of drastically reduced income, rising demands for our services, and a national economic downturn. It will enable us to keep our communities safe through the continuing impact of the pandemic and the other risks we face. It ensures a robust, prudent and balanced budget for next year, and it provides a strong foundation for an ambitious recovery and sustainable regeneration in the future. We are proud of the budget we've been able to produce in such challenging circumstances, and I have pleasure in moving it and ask the Council to give it their support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Swift. Councillor Scullion, I believe you are to second this.
May I second the budget proposal and reserve my right to speak later in the meeting. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Scullion. I've had a request from Councillor Lee to speak, so I will take Councillor Lee first, and then if other indications to speak can go in the chat box as usual, that would be very helpful. Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Sorry to interrupt. Could I ask if you could call for any amendments to the motion?
Oh, my apologies. No, I haven't called for any amendments. Are there any amendments to the budget as proposed?
I'm not seeing any indication.
I'm not seeing any indication either. Thank you. Thank you for the reminder, Mr. Hughes. Okay, so we will progress with the debate and go first to Councillor Lee, and if other indications can go in the chat, that would be very helpful. Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Could I first of all endorse Councillor Swift's kind comments about those who have been greatly affected and lost loved ones as a result of COVID, and also his thanks to all those who have worked so hard fighting the pandemic. Thank you. Now, about this budget, as you might expect, we've got an entirely different view about this budget to that described by Councillor Swift, and I'd like to just go through three main reasons why. So first of all, we're not presenting an alternative budget. It's a lot of work, and tinkering around the edges of this budget would not get this council to where we believe we ought to be. The present financial problems, which don't come to the surface unless carefully analysed, demand urgent and fundamental reforms, and saving £10,000 or £15,000 here and there outside of the Labour budget would not really take us further forward. We can't support a budget cutting public services in the way that this one does. These services amount to around £1.4 million in the special arrangements that Labour made about the new council. So why does the Labour administration need to make their cuts to public services? Well, let's start with some financial talk. In the pack that everybody's received tonight, there's an analysis about council reserves. You'll see it. It's in there. And you'll see that our reserves over the last 5 years have been depleted by £68 million. Now, there might be an argument that there was some additional funds just lodged there at the start of this, but still, over the last 4 years, the reserves have been depleted by £46 million. And this is in the budget report. So what does that mean? In 4 years, if you take an average of the 4 or 5 year periods, about 12 million a year has been spent. So in plain talk, we had 50 million and now it's 45 million in our reserves. And so it's been spent. So somehow or other, that has augmented our spend for the last 4 or 5 years. We've been using that to get us through that period. So that's the first element of overspend that's been happening. But we must remember that now we're down at £5 million and we can't use reserves anymore. And our financial officer has declared and advised quite correctly that we shouldn't go below that figure. So we don't have that available to us if we carry on spending in the years ahead at the rate we've been doing before. That's £12 million of it that's gone. So if we have an equally spendthrift attitude in the years ahead, we can't disguise what we're doing by using reserves. So we have to use borrowed money. Now, in the last 4 or 5 years, our borrowed money, our debt, has risen by about £100 million. And in plain lingo, that's another £20 million that's been subsidising this spending binge of the Labour group. So we've had £32 million, 12 million a year of money that we had, and about 20 million a year of money that we spent that we've not got. So that's very worrying. That's a very worrying trend, and it can't be sustained. So what does it cost us presently to service this mountain of debt, which is currently standing, depending again how you look at it, it's either about 120 million current debt and another 60 million of PFI borrowing. It all comes to debt in the end. So it's about 180 million. These are all figures that have been given to us during the year. And there's a lot more prudential borrowing to come that we already know about. But this year, the cost of servicing the present debt in capital repayments and interests is £9.5 million a year. £9.5 million a year servicing the debt. In terms of the discretionary spend, that's starting to become a serious percentage of what the council has available to spend on all services. And there's every indication that that will be increasing quite substantially in the next several years. So, with rising debt and no reserves to fall on, the significance of servicing the debt becomes even more apparent. And so, what we must look at is a turnaround, a change in the attitude of this council, whilst taking prudential borrowing to buy into projects. In the case of each individual project might be attractive, and indeed it is on many occasions. But the fact is, we can't keep saying yes because the debt continues to rise. There's another £50 million, incidentally, that's being talked about as the amount we'll need shortly to service the local plan and get that underway. And so, you know, the debt is presently around 180, including all forms of borrowing. There's another 50 million planned in the next 2 years. If you look at the capital programme, and that capital programme's risen 49 million since November in about the last 3 or 4 months. It's just going up inexorably. So with over £200 million in debt and 50 million for the local plan, that 9.5 million cost of servicing debt could well come closer to 12 or 13 million next year, maybe up to 20% of our discretionary spend. And so while we're putting out money presently, 9.5 million a year, we're making cuts to save 1.4 million. But those cuts affect everybody in Calderdale. And it's the old story of Labour boom and bust. You know, we're now finding ourselves in debt, and the people, the residents of Calderdale, are the ones that pay the price with loss of amenities and public services. So one of the things that was mentioned by Councillor Swift was the lack of funding from government. And that's very interesting, because I actually do think that the Labour Party believe what they say. It seems everybody's brief to blame the government on everything. But let's just consider, apart from the normal funding that Calderdale receives from the government, in the last few years and in the next year or so, we've had a very large amount of support from government. The 649 project alone is about 200 million. Oh, and anticipating another thing that we often hear, that's it's Wicker that provides that. Well, it isn't, it's the government. Wicker is simply an agency which redistributes government money. So let's be clear, there is no Wicker money, it's all government money. But the 649 is 200 million. Flood alleviation is 200 million. Towns funding coming up, 50 million. In the present capital schemes, in amongst that 169 million pounds, which Cabinet approved in February, is 130 million pounds worth of funding. That's 580 million pounds. Also, I know this has gone in and out, but there's a slight matter of COVID funding, which to date, 107 million pounds has come into Calderdale. So the government has given us 700 million pounds, which is hardly the cause of the present problems in having to close our libraries. On the contrary, that's a very great deal of money. So we're going in the wrong direction here. We can't keep blaming it on the government. We can't use our reserves because you've spent all the reserves. And there is every indication that we're going to continue borrowing, and servicing the cost of that borrowing is really going to become impossible. So my question for the leader is, does he really think we can continue spending at the cost of public services? Or will he admit that this profligacy is unsustainable, and will he stop the borrowing to this extent right now? Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lee. Next on my list, I have Councillor Baker, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So Budget Council is a meeting where we reflect, isn't it, on the general state of the authority, and that's what I intend to do in this speech. So to start off, I just wanted to say, what a challenging year it has been for all of us, and to echo, the comments that the leader of the council made when he thanked the people in Calderdale and all of the challenges they face and the amazing resilience that's been shown across the borough. Many of us would have faced personal challenges ourselves, losses and hardships. And at the same time, as councillors and public services, we've been doing our best to try and, summon up our inner strength to support and help our local communities at the same time. And while, of course, we have differences of opinion when it comes to things on the council and division, sometimes we do need to remember that each of us probably has more in common with each other than we do things that divide us. So the biggest lesson I think we should all take away from this year and with the pandemic is the need absolutely to be prepared. I believe much of the government expenditure, both nationally and locally, and sadly some of the waste we've seen has been a result of people having to react quickly in difficult circumstances rather than following well thought out contingency plans. And it's only when you look at something like flooding, you realise what having a good flood plan and be well prepared does in terms of our ability to withstand disasters. So I hope we all learn that lesson from this pandemic as the real you know, the real threat that viruses and pandemics have to our way of life. So despite the nation making a recovery from the financial crisis that we saw, you know, around 2010, government has continued its policy of reducing the grant funding provided to councils. And with that reduction in the funding for local councils becomes a reduction of decision-making ability locally. Now it's the case that often funding is only available via funding pots with lots of strings attached to it. So voters are expected to pay more council tax, and the burden of taxation is being pushed on to council tax by government. So when people get their council tax bill, I hope they're aware, you know, the primary cause for that is the reduction in government grant funding. And it's not just Labour councils, Lib Dem councils, Conservative councils, everyone is having to put up council tax and the social care precept, because it is the only way that you can fund councils. And still at the same time, every council in the country is having to make funding cuts. So it's not a situation unique to Calderdale. Sadly, though, that situation where funding is only available through these particular grants has been something we've really seen throughout the pandemic as well. You know, the council has got a lot of money, but most of those is through particular pots from government departments with particular strings attached. And that leads to some very perverse decision making. For example, we've seen almost 10 times as much spent on erecting plastic barriers and blocking off roads in the name of active travel as we have with things like the school holiday projects to help feed the children. And that was because of the varying amounts given for those pots from the government funds, nothing to do with our local decision making. And again, you see it with things like the market town funding. I mean, I think it was entirely about re-electing Conservative MPs in marginal seats. So you see market towns having access to these big pots of capital funding, whilst poor parts of the borough in North Halifax just facing cuts to services and losing out. Perfect example of this is the Pothole Action Fund. And I saw the member for Blackpool South, who also Brighouse, tweeted about this recently. And you kind of wonder, perhaps if councils were adequately funded, you wouldn't need these separate pots of money like the Pothole Action Fund to patch the holes in the road. So in many ways, the hands of the current administration are tied. They I think, sometimes like to imagine they're opposing cuts or fighting against them, but instead they're often simply left having to manage the decline in local government. So in the face of all of this, how ought we respond to that challenge? You know, we all want to do more for our local area. We want to see better services. We want to see things improving, not things declining. Now, one suggestion for this has been commercialisation. That's certainly what the LGA has suggested councils look at, and SIPFA and others, as a way of funding things. So, and we certainly believe that the council could have a far more entrepreneurial approach to running services and assets. To give one example, it costs just £1 to enter the jungle experience at Manor Heath. And I really believe, you know, assets like that with the correct investment and mindset could be great tourist attractions, and they could also generate an income and a revenue to spend on other services as well. Sadly, that avenue is even getting harder to pursue, because you saw recently the Treasury change the terms of the borrowing on the Public Work Loans Fund. So it's actually become even harder now for local authorities to do that kind of borrowing to invest in things just to generate a revenue. And therefore, I do think it is a shame that when we had that opportunity, you know, we invested in things like petrol stations and fossil fuels, rather than looking to the future and things like wind turbines and solar. We've seen, I think, even Ford saying they're going to be ditching petrol car manufacturing in the next few years. In previous years, we have made suggestions of things that we could do, such as the community lottery scheme. It's worked well in other authorities, but despite the idea actually passing through a budget council like this one, it was never implemented by the cabinet. You know, I do strongly believe that if some of these ideas of ways we could generate income have been implemented, it would now mean fewer cuts to public services. Another way we could be reducing cuts to public services is by building more homes in the borough. You know, it's a sad fact that this council rates among 15th lowest in the country when it comes to building new homes. Also, you know, the quality of some of our existing housing is absolutely shocking. I myself have witnessed families where children are having to live on mattresses on the floor in rooms filled with black mold, and these are in so-called social housing. And I'll tell you what, there's absolutely nothing social about a housing association that allows its tenants to live in such dire conditions. You know, if we've been leading on new social housing, and I'm pleased to see there's been some progress recently on things like the Beach Hill project, you know, we could provide in more homes that are fit for people to live in. As I think our chief executive recently pointed out, Calderdale Council has received just £400,000 worth of additional new homes bonus, compared to Kirklees Council that received 2.7 million and Wakefield Council 6.1 million. You know, if we had received as much funding for the new homes bonus as Wakefield Council, there'd be no need to increase council tax this year for anyone in the borough. Instead, you know, we've seen a budget that is going to result in cuts to libraries, cuts to things like the Mixed Activity Centre, cuts to tourist information centres as well. Another way in which we believe we could reduce the cuts to public services would be increasing the ways in which people can contribute directly to local projects. In its heyday, Halifax had the Liberal MP, Sir Francis Costley. He donated almshouses to the people of Halifax, put in place the creation of People's Parks, Heath Grammar School, providing great things to the community from the industry and commerce of Halifax. You know, it's in that same liberal tradition of philanthropic, community-minded spirit that Lord David Shutt helped to establish the Community Foundation for Calderdale. And within the pandemic, we've seen how that Community Foundation has been absolutely vital in terms of getting the funds we need to help the people in our community who need that help. So it's in that same liberal tradition. If, you know, we would like to pursue a scheme of voluntary contributions to council tax going into specific funds of worthy good causes. We'd also like to use modern technology to bring people together through crowd-funded projects so that they could work together to better the environment in which they live. We'd also like to facilitate things like friendly societies, industrial and provident societies that bring forward renewable energy projects that local people could invest in via share offers. To achieve all of this, we would also look at scrapping the cabinet system, because sadly that just sees a handful of councillors making decisions about our future. And we saw that no more than ever this year when just a handful of councillors put through the Future Council Delivery Programme. I mean, it's the Future Council Delivery Programme just decided upon by a cabinet that had no real participation of ward members and the whole councils. Often things appear on the council agenda with no consultation with other political groups. Without a forward plan of decision making, it's often difficult to even know what's going to appear on the cabinet agenda until it's published. That actually means you have less cross-party contribution, and I believe it results in poorer decision making without that whole cross-council input into our future. I'd also like us to look at things like area committees, so councillors elected to represent their parts of a borough could work with neighbouring wards, make decisions about how money is spent in their area. This would ensure a much fairer distribution of capital projects and spending across the borough. So this is a vision of Calderdale that we've got that looks simply beyond managing a decline. It's a vision that would mean fewer cuts to services and instead seeks to engage communities to tackle the challenges of climate change, poverty and inequality. A more democratic, greener and entrepreneurial council would improve the authority's income, reduce waste and reduce the cuts to public services. So sadly tonight we won't be voting for the administration's budget because we're unable to vote for a budget that contains both rises in council tax that falls on residents' shoulders to burden and has failed to protect us from the Conservative cuts to public services. And whilst we accept the primary cause for the situation is the government's failure to fund local government, we also believe there's much more we could be doing locally to reduce the cuts and generate more of an income. So we need to involve the whole council in decision making and to harness the power and industry of the people of Calderdale. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Baker. Next on my list, I have Councillor Barnes, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm sorry that presenting an alternative budget or amendment is too hard work for some. It seems it's easy to criticise because that looks better on a tweet or a leaflet than actually perform what they're elected to do. Everyone in this chamber, or should I say Zoom call, has the best interests of Calderdale residents in mind, yet there have been little or no attempt by the parties opposite to address the serious underfunding of local authorities. The National Auditor Office has also examined this topic, and in their 2018 report on the financial sustainability on local authorities, they found that the current spending review was characterised by one-off and short-term funding fixes, and a crisis-driven approach to managing local authority finances. There has been no change since then. This, allied with the simple fact that no matter how much the Conservatives opposite comment and drone on about the monies paid by this government, despite assurances and promises to the country, has not fully recompensed local authorities for the amount of money paid out or lost during this pandemic. Let us look at compensation income. Income, not capital, for those who seem to get confused about the difference between the two. And I just want to point out that our borrowing is the third lowest of any metropolitan borough. And this figure does not include the commercial income, which our Liberal Democratic friends are keen on promoting. This government is only funding 75%. So I'll make it simple. That means for every £1 million of income we would normally receive, this council has to either find £250,000 or cut £250,000 from the budget. It means that solutions such as developing new local alternatives for children in care, which will save the council money, are so much harder to advance and deliver. We also see a deliberate strategy by central government to shift the tax burden, throwing local authorities under the bus, but not enabling the authority to drive said bus. Playing budget sweepstake, I was initially unhappy to get prudential borrowing, but after listening to Councillor Lee, I might be winning that competition. Let us be clear, the Conservatives have been in power since 2010, and the consistent lack of planning, I just refer to adult social care anyone, and where are the various plans promised not just by the Prime Minister alone, but the whole Conservative Party, and no long-term solutions means that the majority of councils in England, regardless of political colour, are often having to rob Peter and pay Paul. It's not often that Councillor Baker and I agree, but on that one I think we do. Given that the above, this is a positive budget. Money for climate change, which as Bill Gates said recently, solving COVID is much easier than solving climate change. Maintaining the number of waste sites, continuing productivity and efficiency improvements, and what this pandemic has shown above all is the true benefit of a well-funded local council. It is a shame that this government deliberately failed to recognise this. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Barnes. Next on my list, I have Councillor Bellinger.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I find myself often speaking about this at many meetings, and I've done for probably the past 2 or 3 years, and that's the commercialisation aspect of this authority and the entrepreneurial approach that we sometimes lack. Commercialisation is a fast becoming the norm for authorities throughout the country, something which is recognised and encouraged by the LGA and CIPFA. Rob Whiteman, CEO of CIPFA, commented that commercialisation has to be one of the main priorities for local authorities over the next decade. And if council leaders haven't already, then they must start thinking about short, medium and long-term strategies for generating their own income. LGA are saying that as funding shrinks, exploring new ways to maximise incomes is essential in order to protect valuable frontline services and ensure positive outcomes for local communities. Councils are increasingly thinking through a more commercialised approach in their activities. These innovative councils are using their assets wisely, trading services with others across the public and private sectors and selling commodities to generate income. I'm pleased to say that through the Strategy and Performance Scrutiny Board, we recognised nearly 3 years back that commercialisation and entrepreneurial thinking was going to play a vital part in propping up our finances here in Calderdale. From this, a report went to Cabinet with a number of recommendations. This was met with mixed opinions to start, but finally agreed upon. Since then, our commercialisation team have been working hard behind the scenes to turn Calderdale into an enterprise and authority. One of the main contributing factors in doing this was to listen to our staff, giving them the opportunity to put forward ideas and suggestions that could potentially make savings or generate income, but also help in making further efficiencies within their roles. Sometimes the biggest changes come from the bottom up rather than the top down. And as an example, the baker wouldn't ask their bank manager to make them a loaf of bread. The report was recently composed by Michael Holgate and Helen Pilling in our commercialisation team. This was actually sent on behalf of the Strategy and Performance Scrutiny Board to the leader of our council and chief exec back in November. Now, I was surprised to hear only last week that this report is still yet to be acknowledged. There is some remarkable work coming from our commercialisation team, a cultural change, bringing with it an entrepreneurial way of thinking through various training and inductions to the authority. Other ideas, I've seen things like the introduction of Calderdale One, a trading arm of the authority that allows for future profitable trading opportunities. A programme of commercialisation network meetings, staff suggestion schemes, and there's even a commercialisation intranet page. Some of the ideas from staff have included things like recruitment of cultural ambassadors, community allotments at Manor Heath, developing an in-house translation and signing service currently outsourced outside the borough, plus many more ideas. Various training programmes have taken place throughout the authority. So far, 72 delegates have been on the commercialisation training programme. Now, I'd like to see more of our senior officers encouraged to attend this. With all that I have said in mind, it worries me that this council administration does not see the importance of the implementation of a more commercialised approach to our authority, recently expressed through the lack of ability to retain some of our assets and turn them into something that's more income generating. A little bit of backbone and risk is needed, and without these, we stand still or continue disposing of the assets that one day we might need again. I ask for this administration to think more commercially, or at least give the commercialisation team more support in their endeavours to create a more financially robust authority. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Berenger. Okay, next on my list I have Councillor Holdsworth, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was very struck by Councillor Swift's comments about a sustainable recovery for our town. Absolutely brilliant that we're having the railway station refurbished in Halifax, so it'll make it a much more attractive town to visit, first impressions and all that. The new station for Elland. But what I'm worried about is that we are not making the most out of our commercial capital. Councillor Baker made the point about the £1 entrance charge to the Jungle World at Manor Heath. Well, if you look at Tropical World in Leeds, it's absolutely fantastic. You can have a whole day out there. And if we were to invest more money into our equivalent, if you like, and make it more exciting and entertaining, it would income generate, more people would use the cafe when we go back beyond the COVID time, of course. I also think we're missing a trick by not raising the charges to go into Shibden Hall, Bankfield Museum and other tourist attractions. Now, some people may say, well, if you do that, you're going to disenfranchise the poorest of Corderdale residents who would just be deterred from visiting. Well, I think there's a very clear way around this, and that is to introduce a residence card, which would allow Calderdale residents to pay reduced entrance fees to the premises in the Calderdale area that are going to be so attractive to visit. It would be good to invest in a visitor centre at Shipton Hall that looked at the whole of Shipton Hall in the round, not just the very attractive spin-off from Gentleman Jack, the Anne Lister story, but there could be so much made of Shipton Hall. It's got beautiful parkland and it has got the cafe down by the lake. But I think that something that was more specific about the nature of the hall would be really useful. I've mentioned our views about the loss of Clay House, so I'm not going to rehearse that again. But I also think that besides utilising our cultural assets, we could actually provide an additional service for residents, which is completely different, and that is a pest control. I know from experience, because we had a huge outbreak of rats outside at the farm here, and we contacted the council and they would have come, had the rats moved into our house. They didn't, fortunately, but they stayed outside and we had real difficulty finding an efficient and humane pest controller. It occurs to me that there are lots of complaints about residents, certainly in West Vale, about rats on the streets. Now, if the rats are not in people's homes, it's still not very hygienic or pleasant for people to open their doors and see them scampering around the rubbish bins and the restaurants, the exterior of restaurants. So if we were to have a reliable pest controller who could provide a service for those people who have problems in their homes, but then for people to actually pay for the pests to be removed from the streets, I think that would be another way of generating income. And I also think that to close the Tourist Information Centre is really a retrograde step when we are trying to increase the footfall of visitors to our town to benefit from all the fantastic cultural capital that Calderdale has to offer. So that's also, I guess, my plea for a little bit more of an entrepreneurial approach to income generation to try and mitigate what is not going to be changed, and that is the appalling cuts inflicted on us and other councils by, well, years and years and years of Tory misrule. So thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Holdworth. Next on my list, I have Councillor Evans, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd start by saying I recognise, excuse me, quick swig of orange juice. Totally recognise the issue of government cuts to spending, but this budget focuses on cutting and services reductions rather than proactive and lateral thinking to deliver services more efficiently. These issues have been raised by some of my colleagues already, and I won't home in on them any more than to saying that we should be looking at things like crowdfunding, voluntary council tax payments, and making more effective use of our services and facilities. I think we should also be thinking about the latent civic mindedness and philanthropy within the people of Calderdale, which was actually referred to in Councillor Swift's introduction to the budget process, and also picked up by Councillor Baker on these particular issues. I think that we need to be looking at more of the Invest to Save projects, some of which we've been doing, which I'm pleased to see, things like the LED lighting. But there are missed opportunities which have also been referred to, things like the Shipton Hall situation, Clay House, which was referred to obliquely by Councillor Holdsworth. And dare I say, even looking at investing in things like wind farms rather than petrol stations. There is a tendency to mismanage other projects, like the insistence on yet more retail accommodation as part of the Northgate House redevelopment, at a time when retail sites are empty and the high street is changing. Plus, we need more housing, not on greenfield, not on contentious sites, which could actually be in town centres with the spin-off benefits of people living within the town centre. So the investment is perhaps misguided in some areas, and we need to think about that more seriously. As has been referred to, we've missed out seriously on the new homes bonus. being one of the worst performing boroughs in the country in relation to new home construction. And that's led to significant losses of income and, perhaps more importantly in some ways, a lack of affordable homes for sale and rent, which disproportionately penalises the less well-off in our community. Whilst I'm talking about the use of available resources, I would refer the Cabinet to the Cabinet's Streets for People plans, which aim to, and I quote, make the streets more pleasant, safe and attractive, to deliver a healthier area with reduced noise and air pollution, improve accessibility to make sure that everyone can get out and about, delivering a more inclusive area. I can't disagree with the objectives of that, but I would also comment as follows. Looking at what's proposed, I think it would be safe to say that the vast majority of Calderdale's residents would prefer these sums of money to be spent on sorting out the disgraceful pothole problems in the borough, along with investment in traffic calming to reduce speeding, which is another major issue for people, and dealing with illegal and antisocial parking as well. These are the sorts of issues which concern the population, the voting population in Calderdale. It's also interesting to note that these plans are mainly targeted in areas like Park, Illingworth, Mixenden. Similarly, the Park and Whalley Inclusive Economy project, from what I've seen, seems to be 95% Park and 5% Whalley. These are just two examples of how Whalley is largely ignored in spite of having large areas of deprivation. It has no community hub. The Pelham Network Centre was shut down some years ago. We have no library. The maintenance of our open areas like Rolls Head Moor and Westview Park and the play areas associated with them have been severely cut back. A more paranoid councillor would be forgiven for jumping to the conclusion that this inequality has political underpinnings. In all matters budgetary, we need more bold decisions based on informed lateral thinking, rather than blame it on the Tory government, cut because we can't think of anything else to do, won't listen to other people's ideas, whilst not being transparent or truly involving people in the decision process. And yes, we need more equality of effort and funding, targeted at all the areas that need it, rather than largely those who support the current administration. And before Cabinet members come out with their habitually glib, it must be near election time, I would point out that our group has been making similar points for a long time. And this budget, this is a budget council meeting where we discuss the use of council funds, and it happens to be late in February, which is not far from May. That's merely a coincidence. As I'm only allowed to speak once at this meeting, I'd like to go on to refer to a specific area, that of the residential care issue, which I think has perhaps been referred to. It's generally agreed that too many are accommodated, young people are accommodated outside. Many recognise the majority of placements are good for these people who are outside our area, but being out of area is by no means ideal for young people. Perhaps it's better for one or two of them for obvious reasons. So it's more beneficial for young people for them to continue to live within Calderdale. They will be closer to family and friends. They may be able to attend the same school and they are familiar with the area. And there will also be a significant cost saving. So it's a win-win situation. Just one example of invest to save and improved service provision. It may even be possible to generate income by providing good residential care for young people from other authorities, so that we gain income from other authorities rather than paying those to look after our young people. I recognise there's been a recent addition to our residential provision and that some work has been done to look at similar additional accommodation. However, the recent addition came partly from pressure generated during my time as chair of CYP scrutiny, and that's a long time ago now. My worry is that the latest deliberations will take too long. Meantime, our young people are being banished from where they have been brought up, and we are leaking more money from already overstretched budgets. What we need is a much greater sense of urgency, which has been highlighted by a number of my colleagues in terms of planning, implementation of this particular programme and a number of others. We need a more creative approach to dealing with a difficult situation. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Evans. Next on my list, I have Councillor Baker, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think I'd just like to start by responding to some of the comments made by my fellow councillors, and starting with Councillor Lee. I, like Councillor Barnes, am appalled that Councillor Lee could sit in front of all of those watching and say that they hadn't bothered preparing an alternative budget because it was a lot of work. I would suggest that the real reason they haven't provided an alternative budget is that they know they have no realistic alternatives, and that they recognise that this is the best budget that could have been prepared in extremely difficult circumstances. I'd also like to say that there seems to be a disconnect in what Councillor Lee says, because he complains that he cannot support this budget because we're cutting public services. But he then goes on to complain that we have spent too much of our reserves in the past, not acknowledging the fact that this was because we were trying to protect the very services that we are now having to cut, having protected them for years longer than many other authorities. I also am dismayed at the fact that he and many other Conservative councillors on this council appear to be unable to accept the reality of local authority funding at the moment, and how badly local authorities have been treated by the Conservative government and the coalition government over the last 10 years. It's not just a Calderdale thing or a Labour thing to say this. He only needs to look at anything coming out of the Local Government Association. And I've mentioned this in meetings before. The chair of that association is a Conservative councillor, and he puts his name to documents coming out to the government saying local authorities have suffered the most under austerity over the last 10 years. And that's not an issue of why we had to have or whether we had to have austerity. It's just who has suffered most. Local authorities have suffered most. They've put in, local government association has put in a submission to the government ahead of its March budget. And in that submission, again approved by the Conservative chair, they say that taking into account funding announced already, they estimate that a further 2.6 billion is needed by local authorities to cover COVID impacts in full, and that the budget is the last opportunity that this government has this year to do something about compensating local government for doing whatever it takes to protect their communities. So there are clearly lots of Conservative councillors across the country who do acknowledge this reality. It just, for some reason, some of the people in Calderdale do not. The submission that they've made to government specifically notes that the as my colleague Councillor Barnes has indicated, that the compensation schemes leaves funding gaps for councils to bridge. And they make the point that government must commit to a 3-year spending review to enable councils to make meaningful and sustainable decisions, and not to make cuts now, which perhaps later they might find could have been avoided. And they too rail against the idiocy of the way in which government currently funds capital projects by handing out discrete pots of money, many of which have to be bid for, thereby costing authorities more money in order to bid just to get the money to do things. And they make the plea that government should trust local authorities with undifferentiated general grant funding, which local authorities can then choose how to spend in accordance with their knowledge of local needs. And then that allows local council taxpayers who maybe don't like those decisions to vote a council out. So again, I don't understand why local Conservative councillors can't accept this view that's so clearly taken by others. And finally, as we are in relation to their submission, they point out again, and as again has been mentioned, the government must set a clear timescale with specific deadlines for its adult social care reforms, because it is that burden on local authorities which is crippling us and which is making it so difficult for us to fund the public services that everybody values, whilst also maintaining our commitment to the elderly and adults who need social care paying for. And so just again, carrying on with Councillor Lee's comments, he complains bitterly not only about us having run down the reserves, but also about our capital spending. And he knows, because he's sat in on meetings when this is discussed, that an external body called SIPFA measures the viability of councils. And one of the tests it looks at is one's our level of reserves, but the other is also our level of borrowing and our ability to service it. And there are only 3 metropolitan boroughs who spend less on servicing their debt than we do. They are quite satisfied that our level of debt is sustainable. Our internal audit system is satisfied. Our external auditor is satisfied. It only appears to be Councillor Lee who for some reason thinks that our level of borrowing is nevertheless not sustainable, and all of these other organisations and internal checks are wrong. So again, I would say that if the Conservatives had better ideas for how we deal with our current situation and how we meet our obligation to provide a balanced budget, they should have had the courage of their convictions and come out with those proposals instead of hiding behind the fact that it was just a bit too difficult to do. Then again, I'm sorry about the length of this, perhaps because I am only allowed to speak once. I just want to touch on one point raised by the Liberal Democratic councillors, and that was in relation to their constant refrain of commercialisation and why we aren't doing more of it and why we haven't done more of it in the past. And one of the first things I'd say is that if you thought your ideas that you've put forward tonight were such good ideas, why didn't you put them into an alternative budget proposal so that their viability could have been checked by the finance officer? I suggest again that the reason you didn't is, well, there could be 2 reasons. One is that perhaps you couldn't be bothered, and perhaps the second reason is that you know in your heart of hearts that the ideas you've come up with are for the most part trivial and could simply not have dealt with the level of difficulty and budget challenge that we have this year. And I find it particularly sad that Councillor Baker gave us a pretty accurate explanation of the problems that local authorities face, but then again won't vote for our budget because he retreats behind the idea that, oh, well, surely something else could have been done if only perhaps we'd been in charge or we'd had more of a say in it. but he's nevertheless failed to take up the opportunity to actually positively suggest what that could be.
Mayor, can I make a point of personal clarification, because that was directly comment on something I said, and I think it misrepresents what I actually said.
Please do, but please make it brief, Councillor Baker.
We have put forward proposals and suggestions previously to this council in budget meetings such as this. One of them, such as the community lottery scheme, was actually accepted as part of a Lib Dem Labour deal to get a budget passed, but was never implemented by the authority. So that is why we're not putting forward the same ideas again, because they will simply get voted down again by this Labour administration. And I do take the point that some of them are not huge in terms of the sums we're talking about, but every little helps.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Baker. Councillor Dacre, do you want to continue?
Well, just to say that the fact that one proposal has not yet been implemented does not prevent the Liberal Democrats from putting forward further proposals. They might perhaps want to investigate in future and ask us about that proposal that hasn't yet been implemented. So, and there are many other points that I could have picked out of this, but there are obviously lots of other people who want to speak, and I think I'll limit myself to those points. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dacre. Next on my list, I have Councillor Baines, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The first point I'd like to make is in connection with Councillor Swift's comments on the austerity reductions. And once again, I will remind him that when Labour last lost power in 2010, the government that year spent £157 billion more than its income. And it reminds me of Dickens's character Micawber, when he stated that this can only bring misery. And he was quite right, and it did. Despite the reductions by the government, pre-COVID, the country had a national debt of £1.8 trillion. And this was created from the last Labour government, despite these austerity measures which we've introduced. I'll go on now to another point. The Liberal Council has an atrocious record on controlling capital projects. Whilst they had involvement in the Cabinet, which was from 2010, all the major schemes, including the Peace-Hall, Central Library, Princess Buildings, Sixth Form College, have been late in completion and substantially over budget. And we wait to see if the commercial development of Northgate House will be the same. I would point out that the previous Conservative administration completed budgets on time and to budget. These delays and overspends do have an adverse effect on the revenue budget. Borrowing is increased, which will have to be paid back in the future. And we have interest charges, which next year amounts to £4.3 million. You will note that 22-23, this is just short of the funding gap of £4.7 million, which have resulted in no need, which would have resulted in no need to cut service budgets. Those are the real points which I wanted to make. And I would add, that if this is the first year that I haven't actually been involved in putting a Conservative budget forward. And really, because, you know that no matter what we'd have done, no matter what ideas we'd have come up with, you'd have voted them down. And, it's similar to the Liberals. And quite honestly, when we were in charge, that the same applied to the Labour, who certainly in 1 year didn't submit any budget proposals. So, all parties do it. You do it, so don't preach. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Baines. Next on my list, I have Councillor Fenton Glynn.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm proud that we've put forward this budget. It's a budget that looks after the most vulnerable. It protects council tax benefit, even though that is going up because more people are out of work. And frankly, we're paying back to those people who've given so much to our community, some of our care workers. And this year's budget comes against the backdrop of a perfect storm of 10 years of austerity, of spiralling adult and children's social care costs, and no long-term solution being offered by this government. This government said in 2017 they were going to bring forward a green paper on adult health and social care. It is 2021 and we are still waiting. I mean, that's even later than some of the Conservative councillors' homework when it comes to doing their own budget. And we've heard some criticism of our larger investments. Now, I'm sorry, but I'm ambitious for Calderdale, and I don't make an apology for it. And actually, I remember the time when the Conservatives were ambitious for Calderdale as well. I remember a proposal made to the budget by the Conservative group, which we adopted for small town funding, because they too were ambitious for Calderdale. Now, actually, you know, that's an important point because A, that's money that's a proposal that they put forward and we adopted. But B, that was the time when we had a Conservative group that wanted to invest and wanted to spend. And we don't have that now. We just have people who want to manage decline. And it's disappointing to see because I think people of Calderdale deserve two visions. They deserve a vision from the Conservative group and a vision for the Labour group, not a vision of decline and ideas to spend and invest and build Calderdale to be better. I'm quite used to hearing about the problems with debt. In fact, I think I've heard Councillor Baines's speech more than I heard Mr. Robinson at Calder High School's favourite assembly. And I heard that at least 3 times. And he must know it's not true by now. He must know that actually ahead of the American bankers' recession, George Osborne, his party's chancellor, had promised to match Labour spending plans. He must know that there was no proposals ahead of the American bankers' recession for more regulation from the Conservatives. Indeed, the Zealots, who are now in control of their party, wanted less regulation. So the idea that they then want to pin that on the Labour Party is farcical, really. Now, we've been criticised by the leader of the Conservative group for spending the council's reserves. Now, as everyone knows, the council's reserves are money that we have in case of an emergency. And I'm not sure if he's noticed, but in the last 2 years, we've had a flood and a global pandemic. So it's the kind of time when you expect to spend reserves, and that's what they're there for. And that's why it's right that we don't run them down. And it's right that we have them so we can get the shovel-ready projects to go when we're responding to things like floods. And actually, one of the reasons that we built so well out of the 2015 floods was because we had so many shovel-ready projects that we could put our reserves into straight away. And I hope, you know, we've learned from that, and that's something that I'm really proud of that we did as an authority. So, you know, we should make no apology for spending reserves on what they're absolutely meant for. I was really disappointed that neither of the opposition groups have brought budget proposals for how they'd do things better. We've just had criticism. And, you know, when it comes to it, that's kind of what we've expected from our opposition groups. No ideas, just opinions. The only case for savings that they've really made is for the opposition group leaders' special responsibility allowances, because they're not prepared to put in their own proposals because apparently, and I quote, it's a lot of work. Well, you know what? Representing the people of Calderdale is a lot of work. And that's why I'm going to be proud to support this budget.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fenton Glynn. Next on my list, I have Councillor Caffrey, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Potholes again. to relieve the boredom of sort of lockdown, I've been out looking at potholes because I've had a lot of complaints recently. And I'm not sure if you've seen those pictures of that. Is it the Perseverance module from Mars, where it looks a bit like the roads in North Ireland Shelf. I understand that in the budget, we've certainly at Cabinet, we allocated £1 million for green initiatives. Now, I don't know if they're in the budget, if they are, they're probably scattered around in different departments, but I can't see the split. But I have to say that no one has ever called me demanding that the council sorts out climate change, let alone borrow to sort it out. And I'm just thinking, given the major oil companies, car manufacturers, the government, Wicker, and every man and his dog is investing in these things, why are we as a council, what do we think we're going to do with £1 million? We could use it for something else. Not to disappoint, I'm actually going to mention borrowing because everybody else is doing it. And again, I mean, I can't still get over why we do all the borrowing, but I mean, what amused me was we got these green initiatives. We borrowed 1.5 million to buy in effect, what's now a redundant fuel station. And it was a bit of a dubious acquisition at the time, which wasn't actually, as far as I recall, put through council. We borrow more and more and more, which is, you know, you've said you've got to do it. I dispute that, but with all this dosh, what we're doing with it, we've got nothing to show for it. We spent millions and millions on refurbishing offices, but following lockdown, we've got a sudden knee-jerk reaction to mothball all these buildings before they're even paid for. We'll never get the money back, and we can't even service the debt from the income. And the money we're supposed to save is never going to materialise. So it's not just about budgets; it's about priorities and getting it right. And we just don't manage our money properly. We've probably got plenty of it, we just don't manage it. So we're wasting all this money, but that nobody appears to be responsible. I mean, I support home working, but this office restructure, which is going to cost us millions of pounds, was just done within 20 minutes of lockdown, and nobody's really thought about it. That money's just going to down the drain for good. I mean, the point I'm making is really, it's not about how much money we've got. It's, in essence, is why the council spending and borrowing to look after its own offices, its own priorities, and everything else, when the roads and infrastructure are falling to pieces, and what people actually want are being closed or neglected. That's my concern. The priorities are all wrong. The money's going to the wrong things and being borrowed to do it. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Caffrey. Next on my list, I have Councillor Scullion, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would do a very, very robust rebuttal of some of the things that have been said, but I suspect we don't want to be here until midnight. I wanted to talk about recovery because this is a budget in the middle of a pandemic, and we actually want to see local businesses and local communities recover. But actually, we can't give a helping hand to others unless we're actually in good condition ourselves. And this budget really is about us being in good shape to help ourselves as Calderdale and other people to recover. And as others have said, I'm actually very proud of this budget. It's been really, really hard budget to plan for. And it was hard actually last year and before COVID-19. We've got single year budgeting from the government, so we've got no certainty about the future. We've got lack of clarity, as others have mentioned, about adult social care. We've got increased demand in terms of more young adults needing a lifetime of care. And that's the right thing for any decent civilized society to do, but it does mean additional costs. We've got more child protection cases coming into the system. And actually that is particularly true in terms of stressed families during the pandemic. And added to that, again, as others have mentioned, the rising cost of specialist services like childcare places. And we were already steering care through a fantastic crisis really before the pandemic hit. And then you add in the additional challenge of COVID-19 on top of these things. It's not surprising. It was a very, very difficult budget to do. And I think we have done a good job, even in those difficult circumstances. I wanted to also just pick up a point that Councillor Baker in particular has emphasised. This funding challenge isn't just in Calderdale. This is not an artefact of something that the Labour administration in Calderdale has done. There is a whole world out there of local government just look at the local government press. Some councils have already issued Section 114 notices, which is the local government equivalent of declaring yourself bankrupt. And I understand from the local government press that another 12 councils are actually lined up to do a similar Section 114 notice. And these are councils of different political persuasions. It's not a Labour problem. And Calderdale isn't in that position of having to declare Section 114, and it isn't in that position because of this budget and the actions that we've taken over the last year, in spite of the difficulties before the pandemic and in spite of the difficulties during the pandemic. However, I must actually, Councillor Lee may be surprised, but actually I do accept the points that have been made by some of the opposition, in that the government has responded and has responded with money, and blimey, are we grateful for that. But I also agree with what the Archbishop of Canterbury said today, which is that the pandemic has really highlighted, it has really flushed out some of the fundamental inequalities in terms of our society and our communities. And we know that in Calderdale. We know that life expectancy is different. We know that in West Yorkshire as a whole, 40% of the people on universal credit are actually in work. That just begins to highlight actually how important it is that you have a strong, fit local authority that can actually intervene, because I do believe in government intervention as a good thing. We need to actually do more of that going forward, and we need to be in good shape ourselves to make sure that other people have the possibility of our help. We're actually, I think, the real safety net for local people, and things like the council tax discount and so on has already been mentioned in terms of being really important to local family incomes. I said earlier that I was grateful for government money, and we have had that government money, but I really do start to shake my head when I think about how that government money has been delivered. And Councillor Baker touched on some of this very, very astutely. The money is being delivered in the same way as some of the disasters that we've seen, like Test and Trace. It's very centralised, it's very command and control, not listening to local government, including the Conservative councils. And it's also often delivered as a competition. You know, bid for this against other local authorities. Well, that's no way to run local government and to fund local government. Towns Fund, we're fantastically grateful for money for Brighouse and Tomerton, but actually we shouldn't be competing. So, you know, other towns bidding into these various competitions haven't had the money that they bid for. Some of them haven't had any, some of them had fantastic cuts. It's also very reactive, and I take the point that we're in the middle of a pandemic and the government are reacting to it. But actually, I think it's reactive, and it's been reactive for a long time. And then the investment is in dealing with problems. The investment of central government in local government isn't enough to prevent things happening. So I think, for example, of the money we've had cut over the years in terms of youth services, parks, you know, I'd like to see park keepers back and so on. The preventative stuff actually has been cut and cut and cut, and we're left with reactive budgets. And of course, ring-fenced funding, as Councillor Baker said, and short-term single issue one-off bits of funding. We don't know where we are from one year to the next in terms of funding and a budget for this council. And I would argue that we need a comprehensive spending review that actually moves away from the short-term fixes and the reactive stuff. And I think this is particularly important, as it's a point to bring out particularly, is the difficulty for a council like Calderdale, which has got a low council tax base. The vast majority of our properties are in council tax band A and B. We haven't got an enormous tax base to go at. And so we actually are very, very dependent on central government money in a way that wealthy authorities with higher band properties are not. So I'm worried about how the government might, going forward, help us as councils recover. And I have to say the signs are not good. And one of the first things I wanted to say, because Councillor Evans brought it up and the others have touched on it, in terms of our highways budget for the coming year, in the last week, we've just been notified that that's going to be cut by 12%. Now, I would agree with Councillor Evans that these are things that everybody cares about, and we're just coming to terms with what precisely that means. Maybe we'll have to do more bidding for more porthole funding, one-off things. And also, this last week, we heard from Transport for the North at their board meeting that they had been asked by government to delay their strategic business case because, and that's a strategic business case for rail routes, because the government actually want to say what they want in rail routes, not actually what northern leaders want across and up and down the north. And the suspicion, which was voiced at the board meeting last week, was that the south gets fully funded decent rail routes and the north gets cheap and nasty. So not only do we want to see a decent settlement and a proper comprehensive spending review, which looks at preventative work rather than just simply reacting to whatever the crisis is, we're actually asking government to listen. And this budget is really, the absolute best that we can do in these exceptionally difficult times. And I urge you all to campaign with us for something decent from that comprehensive spending review, which means that we can start to do the kind of work that the people of Calderdale want us to do. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Scullion. Next on my list, I have Councillor Blackburn, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and just wanted to say a thank you to Nigel and his team for providing information to ourselves. It's most helpful. I think the leaders pointed out some really positive news for Brighouse with the announcement of the £25 million from central government. The Town Investment Board has been working on some really exciting plans to regenerate Brighouse to ensure that it's a future for the high street, and is going to be still up and coming, of course. So a little bit concerned in relation to the potential closure of the Brighouse Civic Hall, and more specifically, actually, customer first. Brighouse is the second largest town in the borough, and actually we've been relying on the fact that people know how to use technology. Well, not everybody knows how to use technology. Some people do need the face-to-face support on various issues. So I'd urge the council to reconsider this particular element. The leaders already indicated equally that actually more and more people will need help and assistance in the future. I think that is face-to-face help as well. So we really do need to look and say, actually, we do desperately need a customer first within the Brighouse area, the second largest town in the borough. Equally, we're planning an additional 5,000 houses for the Brighouse area. So we need to continue to operate the Brighouse Civic Hall as a facility, as a leisure facility, as sports and health and fitness. So I'm aware that there is a group interested in running the Civic Hall. However, equally urge the council to consider letting the group have the income from the shops below to actually run it as a viable operation. The budget is not just about money. And this is a vital thing, actually. It's about looking at departments. Last year, central government provided £1.8 million for the repair of Park Road. Nothing's happened. I'm saying nothing's happened. Work hasn't started yet. So the residents are cut off from that area. And we could have had a total disaster last week had there been major problems with the Ellendra from the Brighouse section. Luckily, touch wood, which I'm doing, we were able to get by that. So actually, it's not just about budgets; it's about how we're running departments, and so that we need some action on some of the money that we have got, and that we need to spend it effectively and look at running other departments. For instance, like planning, looking at the planning department, possibly merging with another authority, so that actually we have a more efficient, effective planning department to get all these houses through. So I'd leave it at that, Madam Mayor, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Councillor Blackburn. Apologies. I'm trying to look at too many things at once. Next, I have Councillor Carter, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And can I also thank the staff, Nigel's team and Zora's team, for the information and for the support they've given me in trying to find things to actually be very constructive about. Unfortunately, I guess I've fallen down in that respect. And can I also, just before I go on, just agree with Councillor Baker. I don't know how many times I've got to say in this to these people, to you as individual councillors, I totally agree 100% with Councillor James Jameson's letters at the LGA to government in connection with councils needing more funding and these cuts to stop. And I've also said, and I do firmly believe, that social care should not be funded through council tax, and it should be done at source from government, at government level. I said last year it was going to be my last budget council. Something conspired against me to actually say, no, that's not going to be the case. You've got to do another one next year. Well, hope to God that this is the last budget council, and that in May it does actually happen that there is an election and I can hang up my my councillor bib. And I have tried, Councillor Baker, over the years to be as positive in trying to work in a council environment. But, you know, it is a council responsibility, according to a cabinet responsibility, according to the legislation, to set a budget. So it does give us really not far to play with when it is your responsibility. However, after that, can I go on to my main comments? So that in 2011, the government actually passed a thing called the Localism Act. And within the Localism Act, it did give councils and communities, supposedly, if they were going to be if we could work on it properly together, more working together, something that neighbourhoods and communities could work with the councils, and things could be a different way of working going forward. And that was not reactive. That was absolutely the opposite. Something that the government wanted to see was a bit different. But within that specific bit of legislation, there was a bit also which referred to libraries and the specific overview of libraries and the library services by DCMS. I'm not going to go through all that. You're just as capable of me reading that on the website, exactly what it has to say and what councils have to do. But the result of that Localism Act in 2011 was that in 2016, Calderdale Council published its library strategy. And that library strategy was to last from 2016 to 2020. And it was intended that there be a review of that strategy in 2018. And if you look at the strategy, it says that what was required was that libraries must adapt and they must be relevant to the 21st century and they must play to their strengths. And in Calderdale, we think that libraries are important in the 21st century and we need a clear and coherent strategy to ensure that they continue to thrive and add value to our residents' lives. And therefore, we've got a vision for a modern, financially sustainable and relevant service in the borough that places our libraries at the heart of communities, offering infinite possibilities to connect people of all ages and from all walks of life to the knowledge, information and skills that will enrich their lives. And they'll make this happen through the 3 Ps, which are purpose, people and place. And the strategy sets out in detail how that will deliver a vision of a modern public library service that delivers high quality, cost effective and relevant services for all communities in Calderdale. So the vision was to ensure those who live, work and study in Calderdale have access to high quality library and information services, to grow the economy, reduce inequalities and build a sustainable future. Promote digital access, promote reading and learning and culture, develop staff and volunteers. Look at achieve financial stability, promote health and well-being, and promote skills acquisition and access to employment. So the outcome would be that those who live and work in Calderdale and are able to study there here also have access to high quality library and information services that underpin learning, leisure and well-being and play a key role in delivering enriched and safer communities. And the way that that was going to happen was having a core library in Halifax Central Library, some hub libraries, which is Brighouse, Elland, Hebden Bridge and King Cross, Sober Bridge and Todmorden, and then spoke libraries. And these, the ones that were going to be really looked at were spoke libraries, and it was going to be a policy that we work with communities and look at ways and means under the Localism Act that communities could work with the council, with volunteers to deliver these library services. They went to scrutiny in 2017, and that was there was a report from that in 2018. It should have had a strategic review, which I'm not so sure that it did. And then it was over and done with in 2020 because actually we haven't had the strategic review. And as far as I'm aware, prior to the 19th of or was it the 19th or the 9th of November 2020, there'd been no consultation with DCMS about adopting the policy that was being taken by Cabinet in the closure of the libraries. And there hasn't really been any positive way forward. Speaking to communities, looking for volunteers in the intervening years. Yes, in the recent few months, there has been some conversation, but in the previous years, there hasn't seemed to me much
my
into.
phone is massively playing up. Apologies. Just hang up on me.
Sorry.
Apologies, Councillor Carter. Do carry on. My phone's being stupid up.
Okay, sorry. So it really fills me with sadness that the decision has been taken. As you know, I've said right from November how sad I am that our library function is going to be what you might call decimated as part of the cuts that are happening within this budget and public services. I am sad because I think there is a mechanism, and I think there would have been a mechanism had there been something, had we worked a bit harder, maybe in the intervening years, to try and get communities and volunteers working in those libraries to enable them to succeed. I only hope now that under the community asset transfer, and I understand there's only 6 weeks left, that something can be achieved with expressions of interest that can maintain some of these hubs, these spokes that were talked about previously in our strategy. There is also the element of, is central government and DCMS happy about the way that this has worked? Because as far as I'm concerned, there hasn't been anything public to say that DCMS are happy with the reason for closure of the library about a future council and cost cuttings on buildings, because that really seemed to be what that future council paper was about, not about library provision per se. I know it sounds as though I am criticising all the time, and I'm sorry to say that, but in this case, I have to feel very sad that this is what is happening to our libraries. And I am sure that there could have been some different outcome when we're looking at people that don't have access to the internet. Not everybody does. Not everybody has Wi-Fi. Not everybody is fortunate to be able to pay the cost of having a landline and what that entails and bringing the Wi-Fi into their homes. Okay, you can have internet on your phone. Well, you know, I'm not getting any younger and I wear glasses. I have glasses for reading music. I have glasses for seeing words. I have glasses to help me see distances. I think I need some that are really, really strong to enable me to see writing on my phone when it's minuscule. You know, we have to understand that that is not what we mean by access to technology. So I would have just liked to have been able to have got the message across, maybe better, to try and help you, for you to try and see the importance of keeping some of these spoke facilities out in the smaller communities. And I would also like to mention in closing the aspect of the swimming pool in Halifax being closed for good. The only thing that I would like to say within that, actually, is if that is the case and that is going to happen, surely there should have been some amendment, if not to year 1, but definitely to year 2 in the budget proposals, because there wouldn't be the cost of that facility to be taken into account. And I am somewhat surprised that there's been no figures with us tonight that actually looked at that. So thank you, Madam Mayor, for listening to me and my libraries. And I can assure you that is the last time I'm going to speak at a budget council. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carter. Yes, and we all wish you a very happy retirement, and the same to all those who are going to retire at the next election, presuming it happens when it supposedly is going to. So next I have on my list Councillor Megan Swift. Now I think you might have withdrawn, Councillor Swift, is that correct? Councillor Megan Swift, did you wish to speak,
no,
or have you withdrawn?
Yeah, I've withdrawn, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for clarifying. I wasn't quite certain, so I thought I'd best ask. Okay, so next I have Councillor Patient, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Slightly disappointed by Councillor Caffrey's comments about climate change being a frivolous spend. I think perhaps he should tell that to the over 1,500 households and businesses that were affected by serious flooding over a year ago. It's real for Calderdale. We're living a climate emergency here. In the last year alone, we've had to deal with a serious flood, a pandemic.
Madam Mayor, I didn't say it was frivolous. I said by comparison to the billions that's been invested, it's a drop in the ocean, which is not the same as frivolous. Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification. Please continue, Councillor Patient.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And over 25 flood warning in that time. So it's a very serious issue. It is a drop in the ocean in terms of what we need to be spending for climate change. The government recognises that we're in a climate emergency and has set its own target. It's not bold enough, but they accept that it's real. And we need that investment properly to make sure that we can make those changes. But in the meantime, we do what we can. That £1 million is really important for the place. It's a massive investment in terms of tackling climate change. And we know it'll help inspire our already really dynamic voluntary sector in terms of taking that ownership for how to spend it. In fact, we've already used CFFs. We've already been speaking with Community Foundation about how we can really make sure that it gets to the people they want. And there's already that interest in there as well. But that isn't just how we're funding climate change. We're instilling it into everything that we do. It's one of our council priorities, and it's instilled into all the capital money that we're attracting. I think we're one of the highest in the country in terms of attracting capital spend, and that's really important that we don't just use these one-off pots, that we actually instill it into everything that we do. We need to build back greener. We've seen in Texas what the climate crisis is doing for people, and this is about climate justice. This is about those that are in Calderdale that suffer the most. They often live in the bottom of the valley. They're often in insecure housing. It's about righting that wrong and using this to help the voluntary community set to do those exemplar projects that they're already doing, that the likes of Slow the Flow and other amazing voluntary groups are already doing that incredible work for the community. We'd love to be more commercial. I know that was a hot topic earlier. Unfortunately, the government has told us through the Public Works Loan Board that we can't anymore. Same with the feed-in tariff a few years back. We're limited in what we can do. So we make sure that we do these things ourselves and be bold as an authority to make these changes on where the government isn't doing. It has been a really difficult year. That's well rehearsed. We were 2 weeks out of COVID lockdown when the last flood hit, and that would have been a disastrous time for us had we not done that. And we clearly put a lot of money and energy into emergency planning, and that very much paid dividends a few weeks back. We're very much put through our paces. So I'm really proud of this. I'm really proud that we've set some money aside to tackle some of these issues. I'm really proud that we've used that money to divert a good portion of it towards the voluntary sector, and for them to come and show us what can be done with that money. This is the year of COP26. We need investment. This is us saying this is what we're doing. We need the government to up their game and show us what they're going to do in this year. We know Boris likes big, bold statements. Well, bring it. You know, we're currently doing a emission reduction pathway work through the Climate Change Working Party, and it's clear that without some major national policy change, we're not going to meet our target of 2038. So we really need the government to step up for all the people in Calderdale who this is a real live issue for them. We're doing Invest to Save. It was mentioned about the LEDs. So I just want to make a plea really for everyone to please support this budget. I mean, I'd like to, if I may, propose that we support this budget right now and just move to the vote.
I'll second that.
Okay, thank
Madam
you.
Mayor, Madam Mayor, I'm sorry.
Yes,
Madam
please
Mayor,
go
I'm sorry,
ahead.
Councillor Patient isn't permitted to make that as he has spoken. He's not permitted to put that motion forward as he has contributed to the debate. It has to be someone who hasn't contributed to the debate.
Can I move to the vote then, Chair? Madam Mayor, I'll move to the vote, please.
Sorry, I can't see everybody on my screen. Who is asking to move to the vote?
Yes.
It's Councillor Naeem.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, it's difficult to find everybody when flicking between screens. Okay, thank you, Councillor Naeem. Do we have a seconder for that proposal?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I'm over there. Put my hand up.
Thank you, Councillor Swift. Okay, so let me just check due process on this because it's.
Madam Mayor, you have to be satisfied that the matter has been sufficiently debated, and then if you are satisfied, it has to go straight to a vote.
Okay.
Okay, well, we've had nearly 2 hours of discussion on this. So I think most of the points that could possibly have been raised will have been raised. So I am very happy for the proposal to go to the vote if members would like to do so. So I shall pass over to you, and if I can see all those in favour, please. Can we please put cameras on to start with so that we don't have people jumping around all over the place, because it does make life very, very difficult for Ian to count when everybody is raising hands, lowering hands, putting cameras on and off and all the rest of it. It's very
Madam
hard.
Mayor, if I can just clarify, this isn't a vote on the motion, this is a vote on Councillor Naeem's proposal to put to the vote.
Absolutely, but we do still need clarification that that people are in favour and or against. So all those in favour of moving to the vote on this discussion right now, please show.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
And can I see any against, please?
That's less than, Madam Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much then, members. So I now need to go to Councillor Tim Swift to sum up on the points made, and then we will have the vote on the budget proposals as written. Thank you. So over to you, Councillor Swift, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Given the vote to move to a vote, I think it's only fair that I should be fairly brief in my summing up. But there are 1 or 2 points that I do want want to pick up on. I think the main surprise of tonight's budget vote has been for me the absence of any alternative proposal from the main opposition group. Whilst it's quite true, as Councillor Baker says, that there has been occasions when other parties haven't moved budget amendments, the occasion when Labour didn't move one was when we were the third party, not when we were the major opposition. And I cannot recall a point when a major opposition group has not proposed an alternative budget. And whilst I can perhaps understand Councillor Lee's point in saying that when one party has a majority, perhaps he doesn't feel there's a point in doing it. But the point is this, as a number of people have made, the budget debate is when people set out their vision and their plans for the council. And what we're now going to see is a position where all the claims that the Conservatives have made from November onwards of opposing any of the savings in the future council reports is simply hollow words, because faced with the opportunity to say what they would do instead, they've chosen not to do it. And no doubt that's a point which will be made many times over the weeks ahead. The Conservatives do not have an alternative to present to this budget. Let me pick up secondly, I think a number of people dealt with this in the speeches already, the points about prudential borrowing and whether that could be saved. I noticed, by the way, that Councillor Baines and Councillor Lee gave us different figures for what the costs of those were. But the point is this. Firstly, as I think Councillor Scullion said, may have been Councillor Baker as well, we are the third lowest of the metropolitan authorities in terms of our borrowing. So any claim that this council is in some way imprudent in its level of borrowing is not borne out by the facts. But if that really is the Conservatives' alternative, then what is it they plan to do? There are, of course, ways in which you can reduce the existing borrowing and reduce the debt payments, but they don't really help, because what are they? Well, first of all, you could pay the borrowing off quicker. But to do that, that means you've got to make more savings from elsewhere, not less. You could sell off assets to pay for them, and perhaps Conservatives would like to indicate a list of things that they want to sell off. Actually, there are few assets that the council could make substantial incomes from, because between 2000 and 2010, most of the council's revenue earning assets, particularly town centre properties, for example, were sold off whilst the Conservatives had the largest group on the council. Now, benefit of hindsight, whether all those decisions were wise, people can take different views of, but actually there are few high value assets that the council has which it could sell off in any case. I guess the third thing you could do is you could not proceed with planned future borrowing. So what would that mean? Well, I guess the Conservatives would probably be fairly happy to drop the £1 million for climate change investment from what we've heard in here. But what are the other things? Likely things we're going to look at borrowing for in the year ahead. Probably some borrowing for acquiring and adapting additional homes for children's homes. But of course, that will be paid for by the savings in the costs of placements. So do the Conservatives want to stop that? And of course, the one of the big thing that we will need borrowing for in the years ahead will be for a new Halifax swimming pool. So I assume the Conservative position going into this election, in the next election, will be that they are not going to replace the Halifax pool because they think the council has already borrowed too much. Actually, of course, it's nonsense. Councillor Lee is just simply picking figures that he doesn't like to justify the failure to produce an alternative and to say what they would cut instead of the savings that we have put forward. And every time we hear a Conservative between now and May claiming that they would not have supported any particular saving, they need to answer that question. What would they have cut instead? And they cannot tell us because they failed to have the courage to put forward an alternative budget setting out clearly their proposals. So I urge Council to support the budget that has been put forward by Cabinet, which does provide a robust, prudent and sound basis for this council going ahead. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Swift. Okay, so we now move to the vote on the item 7, which is the budget proposals as put forward by the Cabinet. So I need to ask again for all cameras to be on, please. We will need a named vote following the show of hands, as Ian explained earlier. So if members can please bear with us through this process, and Ian will explain where we are as we go. So to start with, please can I see all those in favour of the budget as put by the Cabinet, please? Thank you. All those in favour?
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, members. Okay, and now if I can see all those against, please.
That's less than, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Ian, can I clarify, do I ask for abstentions on this particular vote? You've just muted yourself.
That will become clear when I go through the recorded vote, Madam Mayor, so you don't need to do that at this stage. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Okay, so we now move to the recorded vote. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Members, you can either unmute yourself as you anticipate me coming to you, or you can do so now, but please remember that if you could remain quiet whilst the vote is being taken. Thank you. So, Councillor Mrs. Allen.
Abstain.
Councillor Baines.
Against.
Councillor Baker.
Abstaining.
Councillor Barnes.
For.
Councillor Bellinger.
Abstain.
Councillor Benton.
Against.
Councillor Blackborough.
Against.
Councillor Caffrey.
Against.
Councillor Mrs. Carter.
Against.
Councillor Kavanagh.
For.
Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Collins.
For.
Councillor Courtney.
For.
Councillor Baker.
For.
Councillor Dickinson.
Against.
Councillor Evans.
Abstain.
Councillor Fenton Glynn.
For.
Madam Mayor.
Abstain.
Councillor Gallagher.
For.
Councillor Holden.
For.
Councillor Holdsworth.
Abstain.
Councillor Hutchinson.
For.
Councillor Curtin. Councillor Curtin.
Against.
Councillor Lambert.
For.
Councillor Lee.
Against.
Councillor Lynn.
For.
Councillor Metcalfe.
For.
Councillor Naeem.
For.
Councillor Parsons Hulse.
Abstain.
Councillor Patient.
For.
Councillor Peel.
Abstain.
Councillor Pillai.
Against.
Councillor Porritt.
For.
Councillor Press.
For.
Councillor Raystrick.
For.
Councillor Rivron.
For.
Councillor Robinson.
Against.
Councillor Scullion.
For.
Councillor A. Smith.
For.
Councillor B. Smith.
For.
Councillor Sutherland.
For.
Councillor Sweeney.
For.
Councillor M. Swift.
For.
Councillor T. Swift.
For.
Councillor Taylor.
Against.
Councillor Whitaker.
Against.
Councillor Wilkinson.
For.
Councillor Young. Councillor Young, you need to unmute. I think he may well froze, I'm afraid.
He's been having some technology problems today.
I understand that. Yeah. Just while I'm totting up, if Councillor Young comes back on.
We're nearly there.
Is that Councillor Young?
It was.
Labour budget. Is that for Councillor Young? Yes. I'm going to take, members, I'm going to take that as a for. Madam Mayor, that's 28 votes for, 12 against, and 8 abstentions. So the vote is carried.
Thank you very much for that, Ian, and thank you for your forbearance, members. I know it's a lot more time consuming and frustrating when we're all working remotely, but we've managed quite well with that, so thank you. Now I understand there needs to be a short pause for the email and so of all the with all this information and the for the council tax resolution to go out to all members. So I propose a very short break of just 5 minutes for that to be sent out, so that to give everybody time to check their emails without having major technological breakdown in the process. So if we can reconvene in 5 minutes, members. Okay, thank you for bearing with us, members. Apologies for the delay. The inevitable internet failure happened at precisely the wrong moment. So I believe everybody should now have received the email with the proposal for council tax, probably in triplicate by the time the evening's out, because numerous people have been trying to send it. So I think if I give you just a moment to check that you're happy with that, then we can move to the proposal for that and any discussion if there is any. Okay, so if we move then to item 8 on the agenda, with the apologies for the delay again. So if we can move then to the council tax resolution, item 8. So if I can ask the leader, Councillor Tim Swift, to move the resolution, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm happily to formally move the resolution. For those who are following this online, if any, who are wondering what this is all about, this is the resolution that sets out in great detail the various elements of the council tax and the total charge for each property, but also differentiates, because it includes the parish precepts, differentiates between each parish and the impact in each parish and the non-parish areas. I'm not going to read the resolution out because it will take longer than the previous debate, I suspect. So this is the formal resolution that empowers the council to issue the council tax, and I formally move it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Swift. Councillor Scullion, are you happy to second?
I'm very happy to second that motion. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay, are there any members wishing to comment on this motion?
No indication, Madam Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I need to formally ask the Councillor Swift to respond, but as there is no debate to respond to, I suspect this will be brief.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, nothing to reply to.
Thank you. Okay, then I propose we move to the vote, as there has been no debate on this item. If I can see all in favour, please, members, and this will be the same as before. So hands up first, and then we'll do a named vote once the show of hands has been taken. So all those in favour.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, members. All those against, please.
It's less than, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. So we move now to the named vote, and we will proceed as before. If you could mute yourself once you have said aye or nay, that would be helpful. Thank you, members. Please go ahead, Ian.
Councillor Allen. Councillor Mrs. Allen. Councillor Baines.
We have a legal responsibility to set a council tax, so 4.
Councillor Baker.
Abstain.
Sorry, didn't hear that, Councillor Baker.
Sorry, abstaining, Ian.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if you said the same. Sorry.
All right.
Councillor Barnes.
4.
Councillor Bellinger,
Abstain.
Councillor Blagborough,
For.
Councillor Caffrey,
For.
Councillor Mrs Carter,
For.
Councillor Kavanagh,
For.
Councillor Clark,
For.
Councillor Mrs Collins,
For.
Councillor Courtney,
For.
Councillor Baker,
For.
Councillor Dickinson,
For.
Councillor Evans,
Abstain.
Councillor Fenton Glynn,
For.
Madam Mayor,
Abstain. Ian, you missed Councillor Benton.
I didn't, Madam Mayor. Councillor Benton had his camera off during the hand vote, so he can't be counted for the recorded vote.
Okay, thank you for your explanation.
Hi Ian, sorry to interrupt. I switched my camera on. I was sat here when you said for members to turn their
on my
camera
screen,
on. So.
when I asked for the for vote, your camera was off, I'm afraid. Councillor Gallagher.
What about when you asked those against?
I'm sorry, Councillor Benton. I did say at the very start, during the voting procedure, cameras need to be switched on at all times. So I'm sorry, but it doesn't count. Councillor Holden.
For.
Councillor Holdsworth.
Abstain.
Councillor Hutchinson.
For.
Councillor Curtin.
For.
Councillor Lambert.
For.
Councillor Lee.
For.
Councillor Lynn.
For.
Councillor Metcalfe.
For.
Councillor Naeem.
For.
Councillor Parsons Holt.
Abstain.
Councillor Patient.
For.
Councillor Peel.
Abstain.
Councillor Pillai.
For.
Councillor Porritt.
For.
Councillor Press.
For.
Councillor Raystrick.
For.
Councillor Rivron.
For.
Councillor Robinson.
For.
Councillor Scullion.
For.
Councillor A. Smith.
For.
Councillor B. Smith.
For.
Councillor Sutherland.
For.
Councillor Sweeney.
For.
Councillor M. Swift.
For.
Councillor T. Swift.
For.
Councillor Taylor.
Against.
Councillor Whitaker.
For.
Councillor Wilkinson.
For.
And Councillor Young. Have we lost Councillor Young again? Yes. Okay, thank you. Madam Mayor, 37 for and 7 abstentions. None against. Sorry, and 1 against.
Thank you very much, Ian. Okay, so that is passed. And my thanks to all of you this evening. Apologies for technical issues in sending the email out for item 8. We got there in the end. We didn't quite beat last year's record of 2 hours for Budget Council, but we certainly haven't got anywhere near 6, for which I'm very, very grateful indeed. So thank you all very much for an enlivened and interesting debate this evening. And I wish you all well, and we will see you for the next council meeting, which will be in April. So have a good rest, enjoy the rest of your evening, members,